Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And a while ago, we saw reports of the government's worst case scenario outcome for Brexit. And now that we're just a few weeks away from the end of the transition period, it's been reported that the food industry are quite clear that they believe that the worst case scenario, as the government are calling it, is actually going to be certain reality. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So a couple of months ago, we saw these reports of the government's what they called reasonable worst case scenario. In other words, it could be worse than this, but in terms of what's reasonable without, going too far. And it was considered to be a fairly likely scenario at the time by many because we didn't seem to be doing much to prevent it. We weren't actually, it's like if you identified aspects of damage regarding Brexit, it's like, so what are we doing to prevent this? The government didn't seem to have an answer to that. So now we're just a few weeks away. We are less than 6 weeks away from the end of the transition period. We know that the customs and revenue systems that the government promised are not ready. We're supposed to be online by now so that people could become familiar with it. It's not ready. It's not built. And it's not going to be ready because we saw the leaks letter. I did a video on it from the company producing the software, making clear that it cannot be ready in such a short time frame, that they'd warned the government about this, and now they were getting sick of the fact that the government were just sticking their fingers in their ears. The government's report warns of the possibility of up to 40% of food trade being stopped due to congestion at the ports. That would inevitably result in shortages of some foods. Now, not that this would simply result in middle-class shoppers having less choice. That's what you may imagine. Oh, we don't have as much choice then. We do not produce enough food in the UK to match what we consume. There are foods that we produce for export, of course, and some may imagine that, well, okay, so what's going to happen is there'll be certain foods we can't import. And there'll be certain foods we struggle to export as well. So we'll just consume more of the foods that we'd normally export to balance it all out. And there will be an element of this. There will be an element of this because some of the foods we produce for export will not be competitive. But the net effect is still food shortages because we don't produce enough food. Even if we consumed what we produced instead of exporting it, which of course would still hurt the economy badly because you don't make money as a country unless you export. You have to sell to make money. But you'd think, at least we wouldn't starve. But there will be genuine food shortages. And the other thing, it's not even just about looking at the total amount of food. You don't just have food. It'd be lovely if you could just have your favourite food and just live on that. That's not how nutrition works. So if you look at the extent, if you drill down to the extent to which we seem dependent upon certain food imports. Now, if you just look at the overall food imports, you may be under the impression that, okay, we import quite a lot of the food and we're reliant upon that, but actually you may think we produce more food than we actually do. That's because quite a lot of the food that we produce is not produced from start to finish in the UK. We import raw materials, foods, if you like, and then process it. So some of the food we produce is processed from stuff that we've imported. And so we are particularly reliant upon imports, especially from the EU, for quite a lot, for example, of fresh fruit and vegetables. And again, this is where, especially during winter, so there's another aspect. So if you just look at the overall amount of food we produce and how much we import, you do get the impression that we're going to go short, but it's smoothed out by the fact that it looks like we produce more than we do. Then, of course, if you look at the total amount of food we produce and import, for example, you're looking at it across a whole year. But the seasonal aspects to it. During the winter, for example, we are particularly reliant upon EU imports of fresh fruit and vegetables. So, and obviously Brexit is happening during winter. So the season is very important. If you look at annual supplies of fruit and veg, it looks like, we get a lot from the EU, but we also produce a lot ourselves. Not in winter, we don't. So the amount that we get from the EU specifically at the point at which the transition period is ending is way more than will appear from the annual outlook. So in terms of a healthy, balanced diet, problems with importing foods would cause real problems in a country where we already have millions in food poverty. In addition, struggling to export for an agricultural nation would also have a significant impact on the economy of many parts of the UK. Now, normally Conservatives wouldn't care about this. A lot of agriculture is centred in Conservative heartlands. And it will be interesting to see how these MPs start to react in 2021 when the realities of Brexit become clear, and then in the following years when the realities of the agriculture bill that they implemented also become clear to their constituents. But anyway, that's for them. What about now? So the food industry in this country is saying that this worst case scenario is set to become reality. You know, they're looking at it and according to the report, they're going, yeah, this isn't the worst case scenario. This is actually what's going to happen. These are the guys who fundamentally understand the food supply chain in granular detail. You know, that means food shortages are inevitable. And in a report written for a journal specifically for the food industry, which I'll link below, there were a couple of interesting quotes. One of them said the government had told the industry to expect 40% flow rates. So is that suggesting in terms of the amount of freight that's going to be coming in and out, you can be expecting that to drop below half of what would be expected? Because that's a perfectly normal statement to be making. Then there was a discussion to talk about what was termed the medium-term risk to the UK, the border flows. Medium term, I thought. So not short term. In other words, something that will continue for a considerable amount of time. Medium term is not something you use to mean a few days or even a few weeks. You're talking months at least. You could be talking a full year or more. And we also need to remember that when the government drew up their predictions for Brexit, they wrote their report, they predicted severe disruption at the border. But also, they did not anticipate it improving very much. They did anticipate an improvement over the next few months, but they didn't expect a dramatic improvement even 3 months later. Now, we need to be clear. We are not talking about a spike in problems for a few weeks while everyone gets used to the changes. You know, as happened with food shortages at the start of the first COVID lockdown. That was caused by a change in buying behaviour. There was no disruption to the supply chain as such. Here, it is the supply chain that is being threatened. And that can't be fixed quickly or even at all if our government continues to defy reality. Now, what the report is making clear is that as far as the industry is concerned, what we're looking at is, with these predictions, not a reasonable worst case scenario, but this is happening. This is going to happen. This is what we've got to deal with this January. The worst case scenario, as expressed by the government, was 40 to 70% of lorries passing from the UK to the EU not being ready for the new border controls. They're saying that's now certain. The queues of 7,000 lorries on the motorways leading up to the ports at Dover, certain. And I'm not sure the partially built lorry parks are going to be of much help there. The UK government have said for their part, some people may say, that they're going to apply a light touch to EU imports until July. I've talked about them in the past, saying we'll just wave them through for a bit until they get themselves up to speed. You might think that that will help the situation, especially for those imports of food. And while we're at it, medicines and other things we need as well, including a certain COVID vaccine, which is coming from the EU. But it's not as straightforward as that, because there are two serious consequences. One, we run the risk of giving EU trade preferential treatment that we are not extending to other third countries. Now, two of those other third countries who would be facing unfair and unlawful competitive disadvantage would be China and the United States. I don't really think we want to be getting into a trade war with China or the United States, let alone both of them. And that's not a desirable consequence of Brexit for anyone. And second, of more urgent concern is, so if you have delays in exports, you also delay your imports. You know, blocking traffic one way across the border causes problems in the other. Apart from anything else, we only have so many lorries. So if they're stuck in outgoing traffic queues, then that's going to delay them dropping that off, picking up the new freight and bringing it back again. So that extends that journey time. Then there's the issue of permits. Now, I've talked about this before, even recently, and we'll have to again, because it's just not in people's awareness enough. If we do not get a deal with the EU, that could at least happen. We could still get some sort of deal. But if we don't, then we only have permits for about a quarter of our haulage fleet. So only about a quarter of our lorries are even going to be allowed in the EU. That, of course, massively reduces our freight capacity still further. And yet again, I read in this report that a representative of the industry is talking about government complacency. Every time I read a report by industry leaders, you see the same thing. We've had this throughout. Industry leaders trying to work with the government to get things done and coming away with the view that the government are just not taking it seriously. And this is what happens when you have a Prime Minister who insists on problems sort themselves out if only you'll believe hard enough. But there we are. Deal or no deal, we are now going to face serious shortages of certain foods. That, as far as the food industry is concerned, who would know, is certain. And it would be foolish not to think that price increases won't come as part of that as well. But there it is. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.